Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Richard Ryan, and I am Senior Washington Correspondent for the Detroit News and President of the National Press Club. And I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you who are watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by Connect Live and is available through the National Press Club website at npc.press.org. National Press Club luncheons are also carried live by many sites on the World Wide Web. Press Club members may also access transcripts of our luncheons at our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio, and videotapes by calling 1-888-343-1940. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of future speakers. On Wednesday, March 21st, John Bogle, founder of the Vanguard Group, will be our guest at the Press Club. His topic, After the Fall, What's Next for the Stock Market and the Mutual Fund Industry. On Thursday, March 22nd, veteran journalist and TV commentator Bill Moyers will be our guest. And on Thursday, March 28th, former Senator Sam Nunn will speak on nuclear warfare control. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards that are provided at your tables there and send them up to me, and I will ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. Please hold your applause until all head table guests are introduced. From your right and my left, Richard Salmon, Associate Editor, Kiplinger, and a former National Press Club president. Diane Rehm, host of the Diane Rehm Show on National Public Radio. Gil Klein, Media General News Service and a former National Press Club president. Susan Swain, Vice President of C-SPAN. Jane Olson, Chair of the Board, Landmine Survivors Network. His Excellency Marwan Muasher, Ambassador to the United States from the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Barbara Ferguson, International Projects Editor, The Washington Times, and Washington Correspondent for the Arab News. Kate Goggin, freelance writer and the Speakers Committee representative who organized today's luncheon. Thank you, Kate. And skipping over for our speaker for a moment, Andrea Mitchell, NBC News correspondent and the guest of our speaker. Deborah Zabarenko, correspondent for Reuters. Linda Kramer, Deputy Bureau Chief, People Magazine. Jerry White, Executive Director and co-founder of the Landmine Survivors Network. Eleanor Clift, Washington Correspondent, Newsweek Magazine. And David Silverberg, Managing Editor, The Hill Newspaper. Our guest today is no stranger to Washington, D.C. In fact, she was born here and went to school here, but today she resides in Amman, Jordan, and is considered to be a citizen of the world. Her Majesty Queen Noor was born Lisa Najib Halaby to a distinguished American family. She was a member of the first coeducational class at Princeton University and graduated from there in 1974 with a degree in architecture and urban planning. Early in her career, Ms. Halaby participated in international urban planning and design projects in Australia, Iran, the United States, and Jordan. In Jordan, Ms. Halaby became the Director of Planning and Design Projects for Royal Jordanian Airlines. And it was in that role that she met King Hussein. In June of 1978, the two were married, and Lisa Halaby of Washington, D.C., became Queen Noor al-Hussein. As Queen, Her Majesty promoted international peace and involved herself in helping Jordan's poor and bettering the lot of women. Her Majesty also promoted international and understanding of Middle East politics and Arab-Western relations. After King Hussein's death in 1999, Queen Noor has worked to establish the King Hussein Foundation. Established by royal decree in 1999, the foundation is dedicated to give expression to the late King's humanitarian vision and legacy, with an emphasis on democracy and peace, education, leadership development, environment, and health. Today, Her Majesty has joined us to share her thoughts and concerns about landmines and the global efforts to ban the weapon while providing humanitarian relief to its victims. Her Majesty is the patron and chair of the Landmine Survivors Network and serves as an advisor to the international campaign to ban landmines, the recipient of the 1997 Nobel Peace Prize. Your Majesty, your husband also has been a frequent visitor to the Press Club, as you know. So please, join me in welcoming and giving Her Majesty Queen Noor of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan a warm welcome to the National Press Club.
Thank you very much. Last spring, 3 young girls were playing in a field on the outskirts of Sarajevo. A landmine exploded. 2 of the girls died instantly. 1 remained alive, severely injured. But no one dared to enter the minefield. The deminers couldn't clear a path fast enough. Neighbors and NATO peacekeepers watched in helpless frustration as the girl clung to life for 2 desperate hours, pleading in pain and terror to be rescued. And then silence. The deminers and the frightened onlookers could do nothing but weep and look away. This story is tragic enough, but what is worse is it is not unique, not even unusual. The human suffering and economic devastation landmines cause is an insidious day-to-day threat to the lives of millions around the world. Just last month in Lebanon, a 13-year-old girl, Nahla Basha, was playing with her sister near where her father was tilling a field. Nahla left her sister to go inside for a moment, and then she heard a loud bang. She ran outside and stepped on a mine, seriously injuring her eye. Her arm and leg were severed. Her sister, however, was killed instantly. Over the past 25 years, reading news reports, driving past Jordan Valley minefields fenced off by barbed wire, or visiting victims, I have grieved for children and adults in Jordan and the Middle East. Some consider the landmine heartland of the world, routinely maimed or killed by this menace. About 10% of our population lives in areas now rendered desolate, even deadly, by landmines. And because landmines are small and ravage lives one by one, their horrific effects have long gone as unnoticed as the murderous weapons themselves. Landmines murder or maim another man, woman, or child roughly every 20 minutes. Somewhere in the world, in the brief time we are here together today, 5 landmines might explode, and 5 individuals, at least 4 of them civilians, possibly children who are 1/3 of all landmine casualties, will be maimed for life or killed. 70 today, 500 this week, more than 2,000 this month, and more than 26,000 this year. It is a killer that takes only minutes to deploy, yet can survive 10, 20, 50 years or even more, long enough to slaughter the grandchild of whoever originally laid it. President Ryan, members of the National Press Club, on behalf of the international campaign to ban landmines, I thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today about these weapons of mass destruction in slow motion. The 80 million or so landmines that lie hidden today in the fields, forests, and roads of approximately 80 countries, and the 250 million stockpiled around the world, waiting to be deployed, amount to a landmine for every 12 children on Earth. They comprise one of the greatest public health hazards of our time, and a modern man-made epidemic. Landmines are indiscriminate killers, unable to distinguish between a soldier's heavy boot and a toddler's bare foot. Indeed, some mines are designed in shapes that attract the innocent eyes and hands of children. Because they are cheap and easily obtained, they are frequently used by informal militias and guerrillas in local conflicts, groups that are more likely to turn mines against civilians and less likely to keep records of where they've planted them. They're often placed in rural areas explicitly to shatter the morale and the integrity of the family, clan, tribe, and village. And cruelest of all, even in long hoped-for peace, these insidious leftovers are a bitter reminder of past conflict and a threat to future progress. In my work as advisor to the ICBL, the International Campaign, and with the Landmine Survivors Network, the first international organization created by and for landmine survivors, I have personally witnessed the heartbreaking consequences for those striving to overcome the devastation wrought on their bodies, their lives, and their families in rural Jordan, in Lebanon, in former Yugoslavia, and in Southeast Asia, another one of the most mine-infested regions of the world. When I visited that region with LSN in October 1999, 30 years after my own student activism to contribute to the efforts to persuade the U.S. government to end what we believed was an inhumane, illegal, and immoral war in Vietnam, I came face to face with the lingering human and economic toll of that war, and it's still hard to fathom today. In Vietnam and Cambodia, 1 out of every 236 people has lost at least one limb. And the carnage continues. Between 1,200 and 2,000 people are maimed or killed each year. In Vietnam, some 3.5 million mines remain in the ground, and there are an estimated 180 landmine casualties per month. There are over 36,000 landmine survivors in Cambodia alone, where there are over 1 million mines. Nearly 1 in 300 has been injured by landmines or unexploded ordnance, and less than 10% of these survivors have access to medical care or rehabilitation. It is meeting these survivors that brings home the humanitarian costs of this curse, and some of them actually are with us here in Washington this week. Above and beyond the $3 or $300 to manufacture a mine, or the $1,000 to get rid of it, or even the $1,000 to $12,000 it takes to fit a prosthetic limb. The greatest toll can't be quantified. The initial numb sensation giving way to acute pain and shock, the heart-stopping anguish of watching your rescuers risk their lives to save yours, the multiple surgeries to salvage what remains of an arm or a leg, the trips a young child must make to the hospital to fit a new prosthesis, only to grow out of it every 6 months and need another, and another, and another. The psychological scars and shattered dreams of knowing your body will never be whole again. Often those disabled by conflict face humiliation, neglect, and discrimination. They can't find jobs. They become dependent on others. Their futures are stolen. Their hopes are destroyed without provocation or purpose. These survivors want and deserve the means to help themselves and support their families, earning not only income but also self-respect and the respect of their communities. Victim assistance has remained the poor relation of the global movement to ban landmines, the least publicized tragedy of landmines' hidden menace. But even those who never set foot on a mine can be held hostage by these weapons for many years. Imagine a family returning to a village where mines have been sown. Their precious farmland, perhaps handed down through generations, now infested with this evil crop, is useless. They dare not graze livestock, search for firewood, let their children run and play. Even the mere perception of a mine threat is enough to destroy a village's livelihood. In Cambodia, where there are millions of mines still in the ground, 85% of the population are farmers, but have little safe land to farm. And war-torn societies can never be rebuilt if people continue to fear for their lives with every step they take. Peace will forever remain on fragile footing and conflict recovery quite impossible while these deadly reminders and remainders of war are there. The good news is that many of us have witnessed the extraordinary compassion and commitment among survivors, whether American, Arab, European, or Asian, who are trying to help other survivors recover and resume their places in society. I've seen the courage of children who refuse to lose their smile along with a limb, of disabled mothers who work incessantly to care for their families, of amputees learning new job skills, strong in spite of their suffering. We owe it to them to do all we can to make their lives whole in a way their broken bodies never will be. Those who make, sell, and deploy landmines claim they are a necessity of war. But these weapons, even if originally designed for a specific battlefield objective, have proliferated into a source of random terror that respects neither time nor territory. In 1995, the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent commissioned a military study of the fundamental effectiveness of landmines. The committee had been alerted by their surgeons in the field that a quarter of their patients in places like Angola, Cambodia, and Afghanistan were landmine victims. Examining 26 conflicts since 1940, the study found that anti-personnel landmines played no significant role in the outcome of any. More than 50 high-ranking military figures from 20 countries endorsed the study's conclusion that the appalling suffering and waste caused by landmines far outweighs their questionable military utility. Landmines have never been militarily decisive, and if ever they were useful at all, they are now obsolete. More than 15 retired U.S. generals, including General Norman Schwarzkopf, General David Jones, General John Galvin, Lieutenant General Robert Gard, and others, tell us that anti-personnel mines have outlived their military usefulness. The generals also say that the effectiveness of U.S. forces will not be compromised by banning landmines. In fact, quite the opposite. U.S. and allied forces have far more reason to fear landmines than feel protected by them. Since World War II, over 100,000 Americans alone were injured or killed by landmines. The first American soldiers to die in Vietnam and later in Bosnia were killed by anti-personnel mines. And mines were responsible for a third of the U.S. casualties in Vietnam and in the Persian Gulf War. The tragic irony is that 90% of these landmines and these conflicts were largely of U.S. manufacture or of components of U.S. manufacture. What is more, in today's highly mobile battlefields, landmines can rapidly become a subterranean terror, friendly fire underground, posing a substantial hazard to the troops themselves who planted them. My two sons currently serve in the Jordanian army, and I wouldn't be here if I thought banning mines would endanger them in any way. They are among the millions we are fighting to protect. And that fight inspired a new kind of coalition activism, which brought the Ottawa Landmine Ban Treaty into force in record time. the first international arms treaty to encompass humanitarian obligations to the weapons victims. This remarkable treaty evolved from a unique coalition. For example, the International Committee of the Red Cross, Lloyd Axworthy, former Foreign Minister of Canada, leading governments such as Norway, Austria, and Canada, activists from organizations such as the Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation, Physicians for Human Rights, Handicap International, Human Rights Watch, Mines Advisory Group, and landmine survivors themselves, like ICBL's Cambodian Ambassador Tun Chonareth and Jerry White and Ken Rutherford, founders of Landmine Survivors Network. Working together in unprecedented networks, they united in a pledge to win back blighted land, to fulfill our humanitarian duties to the survivors, and to eradicate these obstacles to recovery and peace. The Mine Ban Treaty prohibits the use and trade of landmines, demands global demining, orders governments to destroy their stockpiles, and calls for a range of assistance to mine victims. 139 nations, 2/3 of our world, have already signed, and around 20 million anti-personnel mines have been destroyed from global stockpiles. Jordan was one of the first Middle Eastern states to join the International Mine Ban Treaty in 1998. My husband, who despised this scourge, in 1993 set a goal of the year 2000 for a landmine-free Jordan Valley and vowed to make our beloved country free of landmines forever. It was a bold move in a region long distinguished by the highest per capita military spending in the world, and a deplorable stockpile of weapons of all kinds, including around half the world's stock of landmines. In fighting this wasteful militarism, King Hussein envisaged Jordan as a model for the rest of our region and elsewhere. And currently we are in full compliance with the terms of and the timetable set by the Ottawa Treaty. Since 1993, we have cleared the Jordan Valley of over 300,000 mines to allow those who had tilled the earth so many years ago to cultivate it again, and others to unearth once more our region's precious history. Now, although the task is not fully complete, our most holy land is no longer desecrated by mines, and pilgrims who wish to walk in the paths of the prophets can do so in safety near the baptism site of Jesus and other landscapes sacred to the world's major religions. It is my hope that one day we will have a holy land entirely free of landmines and conflict. Yet much more remains to be done to rid the world of landmines. Without the support of regional powers like Russia, China, India, Pakistan, and especially the United States, the treaty will never achieve its aims. Everyone who cares about this issue is deeply concerned that the United States has not joined the ban. Retired Lieutenant General James Hollingsworth, a former commander of U.S. forces in Korea, has stated that the world's civilians, as much as American soldiers, do not deserve to be tragically disfigured, horribly maimed, or blown apart by a weapon emplaced in yesterday's battlefields where children now play. I believe it is a geopolitical reality that U.S. leadership is essential to transform aspirations into action. We need your influence to stigmatize landmine-abusing nations. We need your example and energy to rally the resources for the task. As long as some of the world's major producers and users continue to flout the global consensus, we will never fully root out this menace from our earth. It is therefore a moral imperative for the United States to lend your full authority to this issue as soon as possible. People living in the United States do not live with landmines day to day. Children in schools across this country, whatever other threats they may tragically face, do not have to fear landmines in their playgrounds. Many say that Main Street, USA, has little concern about what happens to the farmer in Cambodia, the new mother in Eritrea, the small child in Afghanistan, or the grandmothers in Kosovo and El Salvador. I am told again and again that the United States has a national aversion to international treaties. Perhaps this is so, but I cannot imagine that any American I have ever known could ignore the screams of that dying child in the field outside of Sarajevo, or that young girl in Lebanon. My confidence that the American people will support this ban was reaffirmed yesterday when I met two inspiring gentlemen, highly decorated veterans of World War II. Jack Wack from Bethesda, Maryland, was a deminer. He lost a leg in the Italian campaign. Dwayne Roby, a former teacher from North Dakota, was injured on an intelligence and reconnaissance mission on New Year's Eve, 1944. These two American heroes are with us today because they will not turn away, but instead are determined to see the United States join the landmine ban in their lifetimes. I cannot imagine a more noble commitment and dream, and they're with us here today, and we're very proud of them. Mr. Wack and Mr. Roby have committed themselves to the ban, as have numerous retired military personnel. We all must work to educate the American people about this terrible weapon and to do everything possible to build the needed political will. The treaty and the 1997 Nobel Prize for Peace awarded to the international campaign did not signal the end of the landmine epidemic. The mass human suffering inflicted by landmines is still with us. The landmine story, like the landmines themselves, is not dead, and let's not bury it again. The media still have a key role to play in these crucial efforts. The campaign never could have come so far without the press highlighting the issue, and for that you deserve our heartfelt thanks. But the battle has not yet been won. You, more than anyone, have the power to educate the public about the landmine problem, to bring it into our homes where it cannot be ignored, and to catalyze the will to resolve it. You can expose landmine abusers and commend governments and NGOs and manufacturers who are promoting positive change. You can put human faces on the harrowing statistics of landmine victims and survivors. And you can remind us every day that this weapon of war still kills even when the wars are over. I challenge all of you here today to take editorial positions that will make it impossible for politicians to look away from the suffering inflicted by mines, to make it impossible for them to ignore the ban. I encourage concerned individuals, organizations, and courageous political leaders like Senator Leahy, Chuck Hagel, Arlen Specter, and Representatives Jack Quinn, Jim McGovern, and Lane Evans to continue to voice their concerns and build the political alliances needed to persuade the United States to ban landmines. Someday, I hope, we will understand the contradictions in U.S. landmine policy. The United States leads the world in support for demining efforts and provides significant humanitarian relief to survivors worldwide. In fact, yesterday I testified before the Congressional Human Rights Caucus. Congressman Tom Lantos and Henry Hyde are introducing meaningful and far-reaching legislation to promote care and rehabilitation and social and economic integration for hundreds of thousands of landmine survivors worldwide. But this generous and peace-loving nation cannot bring itself to destroy its own stockpile of over 10 million mines. The world's remaining superpower with the most advanced arsenal on the planet finds it difficult to give up this marginally useful and obsolete weapon. The Clinton administration deferred the question until 2006. The stated concern was that U.S. troops might be at risk at the border between North and South Korea. Some maintain landmines might perhaps buy a few minutes of time in the event of an infantry war on the Korean peninsula. But is that worth the cost of deploying something that continues killing long after armies surrender, treaties are signed, and peace is declared? The relationship between North and South Korea is changing dramatically, God willing. Meanwhile, if landmine casualties continue at current rates, 150,000 more victims will be claimed while we wait around for 2006. The new administration has recently announced a comprehensive review of U.S. defense policy. It is my hope that in this process, analysts will determine that landmines and security are not inextricably linked. Quite the contrary. The United States is one of the holdout nations with respect to the landmine ban, keeping company with China, Pakistan, India, Syria, Iran, and Iraq, and many others. The U.S. and Cuba are now the only countries in this hemisphere that have not joined the ban. The U.S. and Turkey are the only members of the NATO alliance that have not joined the ban. How can the United States participate with allied nations like England, France, and Germany, even Jordan, in security arrangements when these nations are legally bound by the landmine ban? In the near future, the United States may find itself isolated when attempting to pursue multilateral military operations with NATO allies who refuse to take part in the transfer or use of anti-personnel mines. There is a saying in the Quran, the removal of harmful objects from the path is a good deed. And I pray, God willing, that President Bush will lead the United States to remove harmful objects, landmines, from the path walked by so many in the global community. By every measure, moral, practical, and even, except when viewed in the most narrow terms, political, it is a very good deed. Indeed, it is the right thing to do. The fight against landmines is an integral part of the fight for peace worldwide. I can think of no greater gift to the future than to make a giant step towards peace by rendering safe the steps of everyone on our planet. Now is the time to end the curse of landmines forever. As Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Thank you very much.
Well, Your Majesty, you have certainly demonstrated today that you are an articulate spokesman for the landmine survivors and to get rid of the landmines. But could you tell us what prompted you to become so involved in this in the first place? What was your motivation?
Well, in part, as I mentioned in my remarks, many years of direct personal contact with the humanitarian consequences of landmines planted in the Middle East. And when I was approached by Landmine Survivors Network, and we discussed the possibility that later became a reality of holding the first Middle East conference on landmine survivor rehabilitation and the issue at large, I was drafted into a much more active and engaged role in the landmine ban movement. And as I said, it's personal observation and of not only the humanitarian consequences, the grotesque human suffering caused by the mines, but also seeing in our country, and as is the case in so many other countries in conflict regions of the world, land held hostage, economic potential held hostage, and truly conflict recovery, therefore, and prospects for peace held hostage by this subterranean terror, as we call it. So I have joined as a member of a large family of concerned activists and others to make whatever modest contribution I can to this global fight.
A number of questioners have mentioned that Princess Diana was very involved in this issue as well, and they'd like to know what your relationship has been with her. I mean, and did you follow her in her footsteps?
I was particularly pleased when Princess Diana made her her 2 visits to Bosnia and Angola to highlight the humanitarian crisis caused by landmines. I felt that was truly fulfilling in a very important way the potential of her public role and, if you will, fate. And I thought that was one of the most constructive and important contributions that she made, and heartily cheered her on, and was very, very sad when she wasn't able to continue with that. I wouldn't say I followed in her footsteps, because her contribution was unique in that her political, her public persona was unique. But I, as I said, feel one of a large family who have been working on this issue for many decades, and very privileged to work with so many who have given so much to a cause that is so important to so many around the world.
As you so eloquently mentioned, the United States has refused to sign the International Landmine Treaty, and that you talked about this on the Hill yesterday. But with so many military commanders in the United States still maintaining that landmines are critical and are necessary, how realistic do you think it is that they will sign this treaty in any of our lifetime?
Again, as I mentioned, the fact that there's planned a comprehensive review of defense policy, I think that this is an opportune moment, one in which we are asking, recommending, and hoping that the landmine policy will be seriously reviewed. And God willing, in that respect, will become a turning point. I have talked to a great many military figures, retired and even current, about the subject. And my sense is that if we can mobilize the will, take advantage of the new technologies that are available, and recognize, most importantly, the humanitarian consequences relative to, as they put it so well, the questionable military utility of this weapon, it just seems to me logical that we will succeed. And I know there's a road to travel, but I am very hopeful. In my experience, people who have served in the military are among the most knowledgeable and fundamentally committed humanitarian, if you will, activists that I've known, because they have seen close up something that the rest of us can really only imagine, and they have seen the cause and effect of the horrors of war and of the weapons that are used to conduct it.
This questioner notes that the United States currently gives about $10 million a year for rehabilitation of people who have been injured by landmines. Do you have any expectations, or do you have any thoughts after your visit on the Hill yesterday that this amount might be increased?
Actually, we're very hopeful. The bill that I mentioned that Representative Lantos and Hyde are introducing, which they announced yesterday, is a landmine victim assistance bill that is intended to broaden and expand the humanitarian assistance provided to landmine survivors, not just in the United States, but around the world. And this is one thing that we've been emphasizing, is the importance of globalizing the kinds of initiatives that, for example, I believe there's a new one, the Freedom Initiative, that President Bush is talking about, that we hope can be globalized in terms of the impact that can be had on people with disabilities and who have suffered around the world, that this is an area in which the United States has led and can continue to lead and expand its leadership very effectively around the world.
In your opinion, is it money the only motive that our arms manufacturers continue to mine or to produce and these mines and sell them around the country?
I don't know if that's if that's a question about the United States or the rest of the world, and I think that that's an important distinction to make. In the United States, I always like focusing on good news, in spite of what you may think from my remarks today. But originally there were about 46 manufacturers of landmines or their components in the United States. That number has come down to 16 companies who have not yet committed to no longer produce landmines, but in fact, as we understand it, there is no landmine production taking place in the United States at the moment, and there's certainly a ban on trade. So where the United States is concerned, that is one of the very positive that is positive progress. In the rest of the world, it's a far more complicated issue. And again, because landmines, as a former Marine Corps commandant, General Alfred Gray has said, we kill more Americans with our own mines than anyone else. We never killed more enemy with mines. And he makes reference to the Korean War and the 5 years he served in Southeast Asia and Panama, and in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, where our use of mine warfare truly, he says, I know of no situation where our use of mine warfare truly channelized the enemy and brought them into a destructive pattern. Now, of course, that applies to people who use landmines in the former Yugoslavia, Southeast Asia, in Chechnya, wherever. Those mines are going to be taking a toll of those who laid them and their children, as I mentioned earlier. Somehow we can be successful in highlighting those facts within societies that are still finding them convenient in terms for economic reasons or others. I think we can turn this around. U.S. leadership, of course, would be incredibly helpful to that process instead of the U.S. refusal to sign being used as an excuse by some of these other countries not to sign as well.
In Yugoslavia and in the recent bombing of Iraq, the U.S. has used cluster bombs, which leave residue and which often end up killing children, as you know. Should there be a ban on such weapons?
I'm not going there. I'm not a military expert. I don't pretend to be. I draw upon military experts to understand better and to help guide me in my thinking about this particular issue. On the other hand, I am a disarmament activist and have been for a long time. But I think that's a discussion for another lunch and another speaker.
You mentioned what we as reporters and editors can do in terms of ridding the world of landmines. But what can the ordinary citizen do? What can the people who are watching us on television or listening to us on radio now, what can they personally do?
Well, there's an example today. There was in Washington this week, there are a number not only of the landmine survivors that I mentioned who have come from around the world to be here this week, but there are volunteers from across the United States that today were up in front of the Capitol, and young people, I think primarily, but there are volunteers of all ages and of all backgrounds who are involved with us in trying to promote awareness, highlight understanding, and advocate for both humanitarian support for victims of landmines and also for the U.S. to sign the ban treaty. So people throughout this country, there are increasing regional centers now of activism and involvement with organizations like Landmine Survivors Network and others around the country. And if we can continue to develop that momentum, build that momentum, and if you will help us, as I mentioned, in keeping this issue at the forefront. I know there are a great many issues. This is an issue that is has its fundamental humanitarian, if you will, duties incumbent upon us, but also, as I tried to illustrate, the United States is involved with and paying crisis management costs, if you will, for conflict and the challenges of conflict recovery in so many parts of the world. And landmines are a very significant part of the obstacles to that process and what is costing more money and taking more time and preventing us from achieving a sustainable peace in so many parts of the world.
There are a number of people who have said that, that the sanctions on Iraq, the U.S.-led economic sanctions on Iraq, have had a devastating effect on the innocents in that country. Can you tell us what your views are on the economic sanctions?
Again, another lunch, another speaker. I have views, but I think this conversation should be focused on the one issue that brought us all here together today.
I'll have to try one more because I have 3 questions. This one simply deals with the current situation in the Middle East and whether or not you see a possibility of an end to the conflict anytime soon.
As in discussing the issue of landmines, you can see that I am by nature an optimist, an idealist, and very hopeful always that, that by working together, identifying common ground, by removing obstacles from the paths of those that need to converge, that we can accomplish a peace, that we can realize our full, most constructive and unified potential. Now, I won't say more than that right now because this is a critical moment for our region and one in which there needs to be we need to reinforce the forces for peace, those committed to, those willing to take the leap of faith that is so often required in order to transcend conflict into to transform a period of conflict into a period of peace. And again, in a way, that's what I'm talking about when we talk about landmines. We need a leap of faith. We need to believe that that we can move beyond those problems that have divided and destroyed so many of us, and that each and every one of us, as Margaret Mead again said, can make a difference. So yes, I am hopeful because I know there are many, many of us committed to peace in our region.
I'm glad we didn't have to wait for another luncheon to hear an answer to that question. You are concentrating many of your public activities on international projects, but do you still have a public role in Jordan?
I continue to work in Jordan in fields of development in the King Hussein Foundation, which is based there and is also located here in Washington. An international branch has an office here in Washington that is working, as you mentioned in your introduction, to extend and carry my husband's legacy into our region. And so most of the areas that you discussed earlier that have been commitments of mine over the last 25 years or so continue. I continue to be involved in these areas and to work with people in Jordan and around the world to advance these causes, primarily peace and peace building. Landmines issue, of course, such an important component of that, international education, and global environment issues.
You've answered some difficult questions. This is what we would consider to be a softball. What do you consider to be your husband's greatest legacy?
I think that could be turned around to so many of you in the room because I think it was the way that he touched people not only in his own family and his own country and in our region, but around the world, and was able to inspire people to take leaps of faith in what previously had been perhaps sources of fear or distrust or even worse, hatred. And I think his legacy was in his legacy in our region in terms of helping people to plow through so many of those barriers, to come to see one another as humane, to identify that common ground of humanity and hope and faith and responsibility for the future. I think that is the legacy. The fact that he never gave up, that he never lost his faith, and he saw it all, the best and the worst. He never, ever, ever gave up. And so that, personally for me, is the most precious part of his legacy. And then in the way that translated into what he was able to accomplish on, if you will, a humanitarian, political, even spiritual level among the peoples in our region and others around the world will, of course, be a source of, I hope, an example we all draw on well into the future.
This questioner would like to know what you consider to be the most difficult challenges facing women in Jordan today.
We're here to talk about landmines. And women are landmine casualties. As I said, it's 80 to 90% of landmine casualties are civilians, and a third of those are children, and many of them, as I mentioned, there were at least 4 girls I referred to at the outset of my remarks who will never be able to fully develop their potential, either because they're no longer with us or because their lives have been changed forever, though the Landmine Survivors Network is determined to ensure that every woman, man, woman, and child, is going to be able to fulfill their potential. It's a whole other discussion, and it's maybe for another lunch, and I'm happy to talk to you about it, but I would like to keep things focused on one issue, because this is, I think, what I want you to take away from this meeting. And I'm not saying that because women are not making enormous strides in Jordan and because they don't play an increasingly important role in the development of the country. In fact, I suppose I should answer the question because there are still so many stereotypes and there's so much misinformation about the role of women in different Arab countries, because their role does vary in different countries in our region. And in Jordan, they have equal rights under the Constitution, and women are, with men, comprise 98% of the population that are in elementary school, and that women and men in pretty much equal numbers carry on into further education as well. And it is a question both of cultural tradition and, of course, obstacles or challenges faced by women still here in the United States and in so many other societies of the world that have that are the reason for the slow, if you will, expansion of the role of women in the labor force. It's doubled since 1979, probably more than doubled now, but it is a steady, slow, but nonetheless forward-moving, continuum. The challenges that are being faced are legal challenges and, as I said, often cultural, societal challenges, but the legal protection and guarantee of rights is something that is constantly, again, gradually expanding in the country. So I think that one of the most important challenges that women face today is how to work together effectively politically, and then how to convince the major parties in our society to incorporate the voices of women more effectively, to see that there in fact is an advantage in including that other half of the population, that can be advantageous politically as well as obviously, and it's a whole nother speech for us, economically, and of course on a fundamental human rights basis as well. So I just want to say that I'm proud of the progress that's been made, and I didn't want to appear to be avoiding the question in case there was anything to hide, but perhaps on another occasion we can go into it further.
For not wanting to answer the question, you did a remarkably good job. Your Majesty, before asking the last question, well, actually there are two here, I would like to present you with a certificate of appreciation for your appearance here at the National Press Club and a National Press Club mug that we give to, which is good for coffee. Thank you. And as the, I guess the final two questions, they're a little different, but I think they're both interesting. One questioner asked, how does a queen promote democracy? And then perhaps as the last, what is your favorite Arabic saying or blessing?
Now, why should it be any different for a queen to promote democracy than anyone else? Now, I understand that a certain nuance in that question, but, or maybe I should say, first of all, you have to promote whatever principles and values that you believe in and believe yourself responsible to trying to carry into the world with you by your own personal example. And then in, for example, my development work, I'm a queen of a developing country, so the queen is not as significant as the fact that I have been for the last 23 years or so a public figure in a developing country, in an Arab and a Muslim country. And actually building democratic institutions, promoting democratic values, and building civil society institutions has been the main thrust of all my development work over that period of time. And it is through, for example, at the grassroots level, in the poorest, often most isolated and deprived communities in the country, that we developed a model integrated development approach that is based upon participatory decision-making of men and women in the community on political, economic, and social issues. And that has been extraordinarily successful in that we are now training people. We have been training and had outreach programs and even been asked to take that program into other Arab countries, such as the Gulf states, but also we've been training Iranians and we've been training Pakistanis, people from outside the actual Arab region, in this program, because it's a Middle East model of a program that was very successful many years ago in Thailand. And it is through those kinds of efforts where you work with people to try to encourage people to understand how much more effective and sustainable their well-being, their economic status, their political prospects, their social conditions will be if they sit down and they talk together, identify a common future and a collaborative, mutually respectful and way of working together to identify priorities and then to see those through and then to distribute benefits equitably among the community. So that is probably as much as I should say at this moment, but that is the way that we have been particularly successful in starting to promote democratic values at a very fundamental level.
Thank you very much. That was really appreciate your being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please, just a moment. I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and I'd like to acknowledge students from the Lutheran College in Arlington, Virginia, who are visiting with us today. And I'd also like to thank the National Press Club staff members, Melinda Cook, Pat Nelson, Joanne Booz, Melanie Abdel-Dermot, and Howard Rothman for organizing today's lunch. Also thanks to the NPC Library for its research. Now, I would like to ask everyone to please remain seated until Her Majesty Queen Noor has exited the ballroom. Thank you very much and appreciate your coming. Hold your applause until all head table guests are introduced. From your right and my left, Richard Salmon, Associate Editor, Kipling, and a former National Press Club president. Diane Rehm, host of the Diane Rehm Show on National Public Radio. Gil Klein, Media General News Service and a former National Press Club president. Susan Swain, Vice President of C-SPAN. Jane Olson, Chair of the Board, Landmine Survivors Network. His Excellency Marwan Muasher, Ambassador to the United States from the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Barbara Ferguson, International Projects Editor, The Washington Times, and Washington Correspondent for the Arab News. Kate Goggin, freelance writer and the Speakers Committee representative who organized today's luncheon. Thank you, Kate. And skipping over for our speaker for a moment, Andrea Mitchell, NBC News correspondent and the guest of our speaker. Deborah Zabarenko, correspondent for Reuters. Linda Kramer, Deputy Bureau Chief, People Magazine. Jerry White, Executive Director and co-founder of the Landmine Survivors Network. Eleanor Clift, Washington correspondent, Newsweek magazine. And David Silverberg, Managing Editor, The Hill newspaper. Our guest today is no stranger to Washington, D.C. In fact, she was born here and went to school here, but today she resides in Amman, Jordan, and is considered to be a citizen of the world. Her Majesty Queen Noor was born Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Richard Ryan, and I am Senior Washington Correspondent for the Detroit News and President of the National Press Club. And I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you who are watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by Connect Live and is available through the National Press Club website at npc.press.org. National Press Club luncheons are also carried live by many sites on the World Wide Web. Press Club members may also access transcripts of our luncheons at our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio, and videotapes by calling 1-888-343-1940. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of future speakers. On Wednesday, March 21st, John Bogle, founder of the Vanguard Group, will be our guest at the Press Club. His topic, After the Fall, What's Next for the Stock Market and the Mutual Fund Industry. On Thursday, March 22nd, veteran journalist and TV commentator Bill Moyers will be our guest. And on Thursday, March 28th, former Senator Sam Nunn will speak on nuclear warfare control. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards that are provided at your tables there and send them up to me, and I will ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. Please hold Lisa Najib Halaby to a distinguished American family. She was a member of the first coeducational class at Princeton University and graduated from there in 1974 with a degree in architecture and urban planning. Early in her career, Ms. Halaby participated in international urban planning and design projects in Australia, Iran, the United States, and Jordan. In Jordan, Ms. Halaby became the Director of Planning and Design Projects for Royal Jordanian Airlines. And it was in that role that she met King Hussein. In June of 1978, the two were married, and Lisa Halaby of Washington, D.C. became Queen Noor al-Hussein. As Queen, Her Majesty promoted international peace and involved herself in helping Jordan's poor and bettering the lot of women. Her Majesty also promoted international and understanding of Middle East politics and Arab-Western relations. After King Hussein's death in 1999, Queen Noor has worked to establish the King Hussein Foundation. Established by royal decree in 1999, the foundation is dedicated to give expression to the late King's humanitarian vision and legacy, with an emphasis on democracy and peace, education, leadership development, environment, and health. Today, Her Majesty has joined us to share her thoughts and concerns about landmines and the global efforts to ban the weapon while providing humanitarian relief to its victims. Her Majesty is the patron and chair of the Landmine Survivors Network and serves as an advisor to the international campaign to ban landmines, the recipient of the 1997 Nobel Peace Prize. Your Majesty, your husband also has been a frequent visitor to the Press Club, as you know. So please, join me in welcoming and giving Her Majesty Queen Noor of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan a warm welcome to the National Press Club.
Thank you very much. Last spring, 3 young girls were playing in a field on the outskirts of Sarajevo. A landmine exploded. 2 of the girls died instantly. 1 remained alive, severely injured. But no one dared to enter the minefield. The deminers couldn't clear a path fast enough. Neighbors and NATO peacekeepers watched in helpless frustration as the girl clung to life for 2 desperate hours, pleading in pain and terror to be rescued. And then silence. The deminers and the frightened onlookers could do nothing but weep and look away. This story is tragic enough, but what is worse is it is not unique, not even unusual. The human suffering and economic devastation landmines cause is an insidious day-to-day threat to the lives of millions around the world. Just last month in Lebanon, a 13-year-old girl, Nahla Basha, was playing with her sister near where her father was tilling a field. Nahla left her sister to go inside for a moment, and then she heard a loud bang. She ran outside and stepped on a mine, seriously injuring her eye. Her arm and leg were severed. Her sister, however, was killed instantly. Over the past 25 years, reading news reports, driving past Jordan Valley minefields fenced off by barbed wire, or visiting victims, I have grieved for children and adults in Jordan and the Middle East. Some consider the landmine heartland of the world, routinely maimed or killed by this menace. About 10% of our population lives in areas now rendered desolate, even deadly, by landmines. And because landmines are small and ravage lives one by one, their horrific effects have long gone as unnoticed as the murderous weapons themselves. Landmines murder or maim another man, woman, or child roughly every 20 minutes. Somewhere in the world, in the brief time we are here together today, 5 landmines might explode, and 5 individuals, at least 4 of them civilians, possibly children who are 1/3 of all landmine casualties, will be maimed for life or killed. 70 today, 500 this week, more than 2,000 this month, and more than 26,000 this year. It is a killer that takes only minutes to deploy, yet can survive